During dinner, Dad raised his glass and said to his sister, "Congratulations. Here's your car, daughter." Then he looked at me and added, "It's time to pay the rent. $800 until Sunday. You're an adult now." I asked, "Why do I have to pay and she gets presents?" To which Dad replied, "Because you're nothing and we love her." So I quietly packed my things, left a note on the fridge, and left. The next day, they were all in a panic. I woke up with a heavy feeling that today was going to be a particularly difficult day. It was June 7th, my younger sister Alice's birthday, 23 years old. How quickly other people's children grow up, I grinned sadly, looking up at the ceiling of my childhood room, where I had returned after my divorce. The room looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago when I'd left for college. The same faded posters on the walls, the same bookshelves of tattered textbooks. Only now it didn't look cozy. It was a museum of my past, where I felt like an uninvited visitor. "Gina, are you awake?" My mother's voice sounded tense from behind the door. "We need to start getting ready for tonight." "Yes, Mom, I'll be right out," I replied, struggling to get up. 32 years old, divorced, temporarily unemployed, and living with my parents again. Not exactly the future I'd dreamed of, especially since my father, Victor Harlow, a respected surgeon and head of the family, never missed an opportunity to remind me how much I disappointed him. In the kitchen, Lorraine's mom was already fussing with the groceries. Her once graceful hands were covered in fine wrinkles, and her brown hair was streaked with gray. I'd always thought she was beautiful, but too soft, especially around my father. I made a list. She handed me a piece of paper. "Alice likes tiramisu, so I want to make it myself. Will you do the appetizers?" "Sure," I nodded, looking at the list. "Who's going to be at dinner?" "Michael's parents, of course," your father insisted, I said. "Karen and John Miller and their daughter, the Parker family, and a few of your father's co-workers. Michael is Alice's fiancé, son of your father's partner in the clinic. The perfect match for the perfect daughter." I spent the afternoon chopping vegetables for canapés, whipping cream for desserts, and arranging the china plates that were only pulled out for special occasions. Mom would periodically check my work and redo it after me, as if I was still a teenager, unable to slice tomatoes properly. I swallowed the resentment silently. By 6 o'clock that evening, everything was done. I went up to my room to change. While I was choosing between two not particularly impressive dresses, I heard the front door slam as my father came home from work. "Alice is coming at 7 with Michael." His voice echoed through the house. I chose a dark blue dress that hung in the back of my closet. It was simple but elegant. It reminded me of the days when I'd believed I could earn my father's approval. I pulled my hair into a casual bun, applied light makeup, and went downstairs. My father was standing by the fireplace, talking on the phone. Tall, with impeccable posture and a penetrating gaze. At 58, he looked younger than his years, athletic, trim, with a faint gray on his temples. He glanced at me and continued the conversation. The guests started arriving around 7. I helped my mom greet them, smiling, accepting coats, making small talk. Yes, temporarily at my parents' place. No, not planning a new relationship yet. Yes, looking for a job at a veterinary clinic. When Alice and Michael showed up, the room seemed to light up. My little sister was the radiant opposite of me, a petite blonde with a radiant smile and a confident gait. She hugged her parents, then walked over to me. "Gina!" Her hug was sincere but brief. "Thank you for helping with the arrangements." "Happy birthday, baby girl." I handed her a small box with a silver bracelet, almost all my savings from the divorce. "Oh, that's so sweet." She glanced at the gift and was immediately distracted by the other guests. The dinner was in the living room, at a long table covered with a white tablecloth. I sat between the wife of my father's colleague and my friend Alice, feeling like a decoration at someone else's party. The conversation revolved around medicine, Alice's success in residency, and her upcoming wedding. "Alice has real talent," her father said proudly. "Her supervisor says she's the best in her class. I wasn't even close to being that good when I was her age. The room filled with cheers. I smiled strainedly, taking a sip of wine. After the main course, my father stood up, holding a glass of champagne. His voice, accustomed to giving commands in the operating room, filled the room. Today is my youngest daughter's 23rd birthday. Alice, your mother and I are incredibly proud of you. You are living up to all of our hopes and dreams. I lowered my eyes, examining the tablecloth. It was the same thing every time, a eulogy about Alice and not a word about me. And so, my father continued, my mother and I have decided to give you a special gift. He took a small box out of his jacket pocket and placed it in front of Alice. Inside were keys with a keyring in the shape of an Audi logo. Congratulations! Here's your car, my daughter, he smiled. It's waiting for you in the driveway. Alice shrieked with delight, jumped up and rushed to hug her parents. The guests applauded. I tried to smile, but I could feel every cell in my body tensing. When the cheers died down a little, my father turned to me. His gaze turned cold, and his smile disappeared. By the way, Gina, his tone changed. It's time to pay the rent. $800 until Sunday. You're an adult. The living room was suddenly quiet. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. $800 was almost all I had left on my card. Minus rent? I asked, not believing my ears. Yes, for the room, my father said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. You've been living here for 3 months now? I looked at my mom for support, but she lowered her eyes, pretending to adjust the tablecloth. Why do I have to pay and she gets presents? The question came out before I could think. There was such silence that you could hear the clock ticking in the hall. My father slowly set his glass down on the table and looked at me like I was a speck of dust on his impeccable suit. Because you're nothing, and we love her, he said in an even voice, as if he were stating an obvious fact. The world around me froze. I heard a quiet gasp from one of the guests. Alice was staring at her plate, her face pale. Mom sat with a frozen smile, as if she hadn't heard her husband's words. I rose slowly, trying not to show how my hands were shaking. I'm sorry, I whispered, not addressing anyone in particular, and left the room. In my bedroom, I sobbed silently against my pillow. All the years of trying to earn my father's love, all the hopes that he would someday see something of value in me, it all came crashing down in an instant. Worthless! The word echoed in my head like a sentence. When the tears ended, a strange clarity came. I knew what I had to do. Pulling an old suitcase out from under the bed, I began to put away the essentials: clothes, documents, a few books, a picture with my mom. In the bathroom, I gathered my makeup and medicine. Then I pulled a notebook out of my purse, tore out a page, and wrote a short note. Don't come looking for me. I'm leaving for good. Mom, I love you, but I can't live like this anymore. Gina. From the living room came voices and laughter. The party continued. No one noticed me coming down the stairs with my suitcase. I pinned the note to the refrigerator with a magnet, quietly walked out the back door, and headed for my old Honda parked outside. Starting the engine, I took one last look at the house where I'd grown up. The lights in the windows, the silhouettes of people whose lives would go on without me. Pulling onto the road, I turned off my phone and tossed it on the passenger seat. The night highway stretched out in front of me, the lights of oncoming cars blurred by the tears. I didn't know where I was going, only that I would never go back to a place where I was considered nothing. The numbers on the dashboard showed almost midnight as I pulled onto the interstate highway. In the morning, they would discover my disappearance. Would they look for me? Would they worry? For the first time in years, I didn't care. I was driving toward the unknown, but that unknown no longer scared me as much as the prospect of living another day, trying to earn the love I would never get. Dawn found me at a gas station 100 miles from home. I watched the sun slowly rise over the horizon, coloring the sky pink and gold. A new day. The first day of my new life, where I would no longer feel like nothing. The neon sign of the roadside motel, Quiet Harbor, flashed in the darkness, casting a bluish glare on the walls of my room. The irony of the name didn't escape me. This featureless room, with its worn carpet and creaky bed, had indeed become my harbor after fleeing my parents' home. It was about 3 in the morning. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at my phone, which I finally decided to turn on. 26 missed calls from my mom, 11 from Alice, none from my dad. Dozens of messages, ranging from pleading to accusatory. I turned the phone off again without reading them. The wound was too fresh. The shower brought only temporary relief. Wrapping myself in a towel, I walked over to the fogged mirror and ran my hand across its surface. A stranger looked back at me with reddened eyes and a wan gaze. When did I become like this? When had I allowed myself to become a shadow, a nothing, as my father had called me? Lying on the hard washcloth bed, I couldn't sleep. My father's words echoed in my head, and with them came memories, a mosaic of moments that had shaped our twisted relationship. I was 6 years old when I first realized I didn't live up to my father's expectations. I remember proudly carrying home my first school report card with grades, 4 A's and 1 good in math. "What's this?" my father asked, looking at the report card. "Why aren't all of them A's?" "But Dad, the teacher said I was good," I answered, feeling the smile slip off my face. "Well done is everything that's great," he cut him off. "Harlows don't get good. They only get an excellent. Remember that." That night, I worked on extra math problems until midnight before I started pecking my nose over my notebook. The next day at school, I was so exhausted, I fell asleep in art class. But by the end of the quarter, I had A's in every subject. By the time I was 8, I knew for sure I wanted to be a veterinarian. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, worked at the veterinary clinic and sometimes took me with her. I was mesmerized by her ability to understand animals, to treat them, to give them comfort. "Dad, I want to treat animals when I grow up," I said at dinner one night. My father put down his fork and looked at me intently. "You're going to be a doctor, Gina, a real doctor. Veterinarian isn't Harlow's profession." "But I love animals. You're just a child, and you don't know what you want." His tone didn't suggest any further discussion. "I don't work 14-hour days in the operating room for my daughter to mess around with cats and dogs." Mom put her hand on my shoulder, silently asking me not to argue. It was always like that. She never contradicted her husband, even when she disagreed with him. When I turned 10, Alice was born. She was perfect from the start, a calm child with clear blue eyes, so much like her father's. "My blood," he would say proudly as he held her in his arms. I inherited my mother's brown eyes and her personality, which my father thought was too soft. The difference in attitude became more noticeable as the years went by. I did well academically and was captain of the school debate team, but it was never enough. Alice could bring a B in literature, and my father would only joke that the humanities were not important for a future surgeon. When I was 16, I won a city science project competition with a paper on wild animal behavior. The award ceremony coincided with my father's important surgery, and of course, he didn't come. Mom sat in the front row, applauding so loudly that I felt embarrassed. But her pride wasn't enough to fill the void of Dad's absence. 2 years later, Alice, who was 8 at the time, was playing a tree in a school play. Her father canceled a scheduled surgery so he could attend. "Some things are more important than work," he said at the time. In high school, I secretly applied to veterinary medicine school at Cornell and received a scholarship from my parents. When the acceptance letter came, I had a confession to make. "You did what?" My dad looked at me like I'd confessed to a crime. "I got into veterinary school," I repeated, trying to make my voice sound confident, "with a full scholarship." "I'm not giving you a dime for this nonsense." My father tossed the letter on the table. "You're going to medical school like we planned." "Victor," Mom intervened quietly, "she got the scholarship. That's a big accomplishment." "Don't interfere, Lorraine," he cut her off. "You're always spoiling her. That's why she's grown so willful." That night ended with me crying and my mom quietly comforting me in my room while my dad watched TV downstairs as if nothing had happened. I did get into veterinary school after all. It was my first real rebellion, my first step toward independence, and the last straw for my father. He never fully forgave me for that decision. My graduation day was clear and sunny. I stood in the crowd of graduates wearing a black robe, searching with my eyes for my parents among the onlookers. My mother was there, carrying a bouquet of yellow tulips, my favorite. Next to her sat 13-year-old Alice, clearly bored. Dad's seat was empty. "He had emergency surgery, honey," Mom explained, hugging me after the ceremony. "He really wanted to come." I nodded, pretending to believe her. But deep down, I knew the truth. My graduation just wasn't a big enough deal for him. 3 months later, I was standing in the back rows of the school auditorium, watching Alice receive her award for winning the Science Olympiad. Her father sat in the front row, his face glowing with pride. He brought her a huge bouquet of lilies and filmed the entire evening. "My daughter will follow in my footsteps," he proudly told his colleagues at the reception after the ceremony. "She has a real talent for medicine." I met Nate at 26, working in a small veterinary clinic. He was bringing his old Labrador, Max, in to be treated. Nate was a high school history teacher, calm, thoughtful, with an amazing ability to listen. After 3 months of dating, I decided to introduce him to my parents. "Teacher?" My dad wasn't even trying to hide his disappointment. "Really, Gina? First veterinary school, now school teacher?" "Dad, Nate's a wonderful man," I argued. "He loves his job and—" "How much money does he make?" Dad interrupted. "How is he going to support his family on a teacher's salary?" "We both work." I felt myself blush in humiliation. "And money isn't the main thing." "Of course it's not," my father snorted. "For you, it's always about choosing the wrong thing." Nate sat next to me, smiling politely, but I could see his shoulders tense. After dinner, he said my father was an interesting man. It was the most diplomatic characterization one could give. We were married a year later in a small church with a minimum of guests. My father attended, but his stony expression spoiled many a wedding photo. "He looks like he's at a funeral, not a wedding," my friend Tessa remarked. When Alice brought home her first serious boyfriend, Michael, the son of her father's coworker, a medical student, the reaction was quite different. His father took him golfing, showed him family albums, told him medical stories. "Now that's the right choice," he told Alice so I could hear. Our marriage to Nate lasted 5 years. The official reason for divorce was irreconcilable differences, but the reality was more complicated. I was so eager to prove to my father that my choices were the right ones that I turned our marriage into an endless display of success. I worked overtime so we could afford a more expensive car and a house in an upscale neighborhood. Nate wanted kids, but I put it off. I needed to do better first, become a clinic manager, open my own practice. Gina, we're not living our lives," Nate said the night we finally accepted that our marriage was dying. "You're trying to prove something, but not to me. And I'm tired of being part of that proof." I couldn't object because he was right. All my life I'd spent trying to earn the approval of a man for whom nothing was ever good enough. And in the process, I lost myself. After the divorce, I had to sell the house to pay Nate his share and cover my debts. My pride was hurt, but not enough to turn down my mom's offer to stay with them temporarily. "Just for a couple months until I get back on my feet," I convinced myself. That was 3 months ago. As I lay in my bed, I saw the whole picture of my life clearly for the first time. My father's rejection of my decisions, my mother's inability to protect me, my desperate attempts to prove my worth, all of it had shaped a man I no longer respected. A woman who was willing to endure humiliation just so she wouldn't be alone. A woman who destroyed her own marriage because of a phantom hope of paternal approval. "You're nothing!" Those words, spoken by my father over dinner, were just the culmination of everything he'd shown me over the years. And the worst part was, I almost believed him. Almost accepted his assessment as the truth. Dawn found me still awake. I went to the window and pulled back the faded curtains. The sun was slowly rising over the horizon, coloring the sky a soft pink. A new day. And for the first time in a long time, I felt strangely relieved, as if the heavy chains I'd been carrying all my life had finally begun to fall away. The "Welcome to Maplewood" sign appeared on the horizon when my eyes were already drooping with fatigue. The small town 3 hours away from my hometown seemed like the perfect getaway. Far enough away to make a fresh start, but not so far away that I felt completely disconnected from the world I was used to. I chose Maplewood for a reason. Tessa Montgomery, my best friend since college, lived here. We hadn't seen each other in almost 2 years, but we kept in touch through texts and occasional phone calls. She was the only person I decided to call after my impulsive escape. "Wait, you're driving now?" Tessa interjected, when I confusingly explained the situation. "Gina, just come over. I have a guest room and enough whiskey to discuss any disaster." Tessa was waiting on the porch, still the same redhead, freckled, with a wide smile. She hugged me so tightly it was hard to breathe for a moment. "God, you look terrible," she said, pulling away. "But it's fixable. Come on, I've got the room ready." I slept for almost 24 hours. When I finally got out of bed, it was dusk outside the window. In the kitchen, Tessa was making dinner and put a large mug of coffee in front of me. "So," she said, "tell me the story." And I did. Everything from the humiliating dinner to the night I ran away. Tessa listened silently, shaking her head occasionally. "You know," she said when I was done, "I always thought your father was an asshole. But now I see that I underestimated the magnitude of the problem." "I have a suggestion," Tessa continued. "I need an assistant at the clinic. My assistant Lisa is going on maternity leave in a month. You can live here temporarily, and then we'll find you something permanent." "Tess, I can't." "Yes, you can," she interrupted. "And don't argue with the man who gives you shelter, a job, and pasta carbonara." The next morning, I turned on my phone for the first time since my escape. An avalanche of notifications came down instantly, dozens of missed calls and messages. Most of the calls were from my mom. Her messages evolved from panicked to pleading. The last one came last night. "I love you no matter what happens. Please be careful." There were several confused messages from Alice. "What happened? Why did you leave so suddenly? Dad is furious. Mom is crying. Please call." Messages from her father were few but eloquent. "This is completely irresponsible, even for you. Your mother is on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of your teenage antics. You made a drama out of nothing, as usual." Not a word of apology. I wrote a quick message to my mom. "I'm safe. I just need some time. Please don't worry." Then turned the phone off again. Tessa's clinic was located in downtown Maplewood, a small but modern building with a bright paws and tails sign. Inside, it smelled of antiseptic and pet food, a familiar, almost native odor. "Welcome to my empire." Tessa led me through the offices. 2 exam rooms, an operating room, a lab. Nothing spectacular, but we're doing a good job. By the end of the week, I was fully immersed in my work. I was helping with appointments, assisting on minor surgeries, running labs. The work didn't leave much time for thinking, and that was exactly what I needed. In my rare free moments, I turned on my phone to check for messages from my mom. She wrote every day, short notes about the weather, a new book, the neighbor's cat. No pressure, no questions about coming back. I replied one-wordedly, but regularly, so she wouldn't worry. Maplewood turned out to be exactly as I had imagined. Quiet, cozy, with friendly residents, and a leisurely pace of life. I began to get used to this new life, without the constant feeling that I wasn't living up to someone else's expectations. One morning, about 3 weeks after I arrived, the clinic door opened and I saw Alice. My little sister looked tired, with shadows under her eyes and her hair unaccustomedly disheveled. "Hi," she said uncertainly. "Your friend said you were here?" I froze, not knowing what to say. "Could we talk?" Alice asked. "Please?" Tessa, noticing my confusion, walked over quickly. "I can take the next patient," she said. "Use the counseling room, there's no one in there." Alice sat across from me, nervously rubbing the strap of her expensive watch, a gift from her father last Christmas. How did you find me? I asked, breaking the awkward silence. I called all your university friends, she said. Your friend Carol said you might be at Tessa's. Why are you here, Alice? Gina, Mom's freaking out. Dad's angry. Everything's been a mess since you left. Come home. We can fix this. I shook my head, feeling the bitterness rising inside. There's nothing to fix, Alice. Dad had said what he'd been thinking about me for years. He just hadn't said it out loud before. He didn't mean it, Alice objected. You know what he's like, strict, demanding. He just wanted you to be better. Better? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. He called me a jerk in front of all your guests. How was that supposed to make me better? Alice looked away. He was upset. You've been living at home for 3 months and no money has been deposited into your account. He just wanted to shake you up. Alice, it's not about the money, I said quietly. It's that he never thought I was worth loving. I've always been a disappointment to him, ever since I was a child. That's not true, Alice exclaimed. He loves you, just in his own way. In his own way? I could feel my voice shaking. When he missed my graduation, but canceled my surgery for your high school play, that was love in its own way. Alice was silent, lowering her eyes. It's not my fault he loves me more, she whispered finally. The words hit her harder than any insult she had ever heard from her father. Because there was truth in them, simple and brutal. It wasn't Alice's fault. And it wasn't my fault. It was only my father's fault for creating this unhealthy system. I know, I answered quietly. It's not your fault, Alice, but I can't be a part of this family anymore. I need to find myself without the constant feeling that I'm not good enough. And what do I tell my parents? The truth. That I'm fine. That I need time. And that I'm not coming back. After my sister left, I sat in my empty office, feeling strangely light. Talking to Alice had finally convinced me of the rightness of my decision. Our family was hopelessly warped, and the only way to preserve myself was to cut those ties completely. That same day, I changed my phone number, leaving the new contact only to Tessa. To my mom, I sent one last message. I need time and space. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Please respect my decision. Working at the clinic gradually became my anchor. By the end of the first month, Tessa was trusting me with independent appointments, and clients started asking to schedule them specifically with me. That's how I met Ben Foster. He came in with an elderly beagle named Charlie, suffering from arthritis. A tall man with attentive gray eyes and early gray in his dark hair, Ben held Charlie with such care that it immediately caught my attention. We've been told you're well versed in the problems of older dogs, he said. When we were discussing a treatment regimen, Ben mentioned that he had a hospice for old animals outside of town. A hospice? I asked with interest. More like a nursing home for animals, he smiled. I take in old pets that have been abandoned or neglected and give them a good old age. Ben's hospice turned out to be an old farm converted for the needs of older animals. Spacious dog enclosures, cozy cat houses, even a separate room for rabbits and guinea pigs. How did you come up with this? I asked, helping to put out the food. I once had a successful law practice in a big city, he began. Then my dog Buddy got old and sick. The vet suggested I put him to sleep. Why torture an old man? But I couldn't. Buddy took care of me for 15 years. I couldn't just throw him away. I moved out of town so Buddy could spend his last days in nature. And I realized that a lot of older animals are just thrown away when they become problematic. That's how the idea for hospice was born. After that meeting, we became friends. Ben proved to be an attentive listener, and one day I told him my whole story. You know what the problem is? He said when I was done. You still define yourself through his attitude. You're not the daughter that her father doesn't love. You're just Gina, and that's more than enough. Those words made me rethink my identity. Who am I without the label of disappointment? Who do I want to be? The answer began to take shape one evening as Tessa and I were driving back from a farm call. Something was moving on the side of the road, a small ball of dirty wool. "Pull over!" I shouted, and Tessa braked sharply. There was a dog lying in the roadside ditch, a young mongrel with obvious signs of abuse. One leg was unnaturally twisted, a gaping wound in its side, its eyes full of fear. We carefully loaded her into the car and rushed her to the clinic. I spent the next 3 hours in the operating room, setting the broken leg and sewing up the wounds. The dog, a female, about a year old, was emaciated, but fighting for life with amazing tenacity. "What are we going to do with her?" Tessa asked when we were done with the surgery. There was no room at the shelter right now. I stared at the sleeping dog, at her tattered body and recently stitched wounds. Something stirred inside, a sense of responsibility, a desire to protect. "I'll take her in," I said firmly. "She needs a home, and so do I." And so Marley came into my life, the first member of my own new family. Yellow leaves swirled in the air, lining the path leading to the porch of my new home. It had been 6 months since I'd left my parents' house, 6 months of a new life. I had my own place now, a small one-story house with a garden on the outskirts of Maplewood. Nothing fancy 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen with worn countertops and creaky cabinets. But this house was mine, and the rent was well within my salary at Tessa's clinic. Marley ran ahead of me, limping on her back leg. Despite all the treatment, she had never fully recovered from her injury. But that didn't stop her from enjoying life. She enthusiastically sniffed every bush, chased squirrels, and rolled around in fallen leaves. "Marley, home!" I called out as I climbed onto the porch. The dog grudgingly trotted toward me, but halfway there she stopped, sniffing. A moment later, he barked happily and raced toward the gate. I turned and saw Ben opening the gate. "Hi, girls," he smiled, bending down to pet Marley. He had a paper bag of groceries in his hands. "I figured after a 12-hour shift, you wouldn't want to cook." It had become something of a tradition. Ben would bring dinner on Thursdays, my longest work days. We cooked together, talked about everything, and sometimes stayed up late watching old movies. A perfect friendship without complications or expectations. At least that's how I envisioned it. But lately, something had changed. I've been catching myself staring at his hands for too long when he's chopping vegetables, or that my heart starts beating faster when he calls, or that I choose to dress more carefully on days when I know I'll see him. "Seafood pasta and your favorite cheesecake from Sweet Spoon." Ben set the bag on the kitchen table. "And wine, because we're celebrating tonight." "Celebrating?" I raised an eyebrow, reaching for the plates. "6 months into your new life," he explained, uncorking the bottle. "A significant date." I froze, realizing he was right. It was exactly 6 months since I'd run away from home after my father's humiliating words. 6 months of a new life, a new job, a new relationship. And for the first time, I didn't feel heavy in my chest thinking about it. "You know," I said, taking a glass of wine, "you're right. This is really worth celebrating." Over dinner, I told Ben about my last session with Dr. Heller. I started therapy 3 months ago when I realized that despite all the changes in my life, my inner demons hadn't gone anywhere. We talked about perfectionism, I explained as I spooned pasta onto my fork, about how my desire to be perfect was a reaction to my father's constant criticism. If I could be flawless, maybe he would finally love me. "And what did Dr. Heller say?" Ben asked, looking at me carefully. "That perfectionism is a defense mechanism that does more harm than good, and that I needed to learn to value myself regardless of other people's evaluations." Ben smiled softly. "Smart woman, your doctor, Heller." "Yes, although sometimes I want to strangle her for those heartfelt questions that make me sob all session long." We laughed, and the conversation turned to lighter topics: new patients at the clinic, roof problems at Ben's hospice, town gossip. The last 6 months had been a period of recovery and growth. Working at Tessa's clinic had become not just a way for me to earn a living, but a source of pride. My diagnostic abilities were recognized not only by Tessa, but also by pet owners who now frequently ask to make appointments with me. I finally felt like I had found my place. One day, Tessa caught me reading a research paper on new treatments for arthritis in dogs. "Have you ever thought about specializing?" she asked. "You have a clear talent for working with older animals." The idea lingered in my mind. I started reading more, attending online seminars, consulting with colleagues from other clinics, and gradually, the most complex elderly patients began to be referred to me, not only from Maplewood, but from neighboring towns as well. Marley also became an important part of my recovery. She needed me, and that gave me purpose beyond work. We walked twice a day, visited dog parks, and did rehab for her injured paw. Gradually, the fearful, battered dog turned into a confident, playful creature, though she still retained some wariness of strangers. Ben was the only person, besides me, that Marley trusted unconditionally. Seeing them together, the way Marley laid her head in his lap, the way he scratched her behind the ears in the exact spot she loved, I felt warmth in my chest. Ben understood animals like no one else, and he seemed to understand me. Our Thursday night dinners became the anchor of my week. Sometimes we'd go to the movies or local fairs. Sometimes I'd help him with hospice care. Ben never pushed, never demanded more than I was willing to give. After the disaster of my marriage and all the events with my father, this unobtrusive support was exactly what I needed. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew my feelings for him went beyond friendship, and that scared me. I was afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past, of getting too attached to someone again, of losing myself in a relationship again. My fear peaked in early November when Ben invited me to the annual veterinarian charity ball. "It's not a date," he added quickly, noticing my confusion. "I just thought you might be interested in meeting colleagues from other clinics. And Dr. Jameson, the geriatric veterinary specialist, will be there." I agreed, but I was nervous the whole week before the ball, as if it was not just a professional event, but my first date after my divorce. I even discussed it with Dr. Heller. "What exactly is it that scares you, Gina?" she asked, tapping her pencil on her notebook. "I'm afraid of losing myself again," I admitted. "That I'd go back to trying to conform to someone else's expectations instead of being myself." Had Ben given you any reason to think he expected anything different from you? I wondered. Ben had always accepted me for who I was, with my fears, my traumas, my insecurities. He'd never tried to change me or push me into something I wasn't ready for. "No," I admitted. "But my ex-husband didn't either. Until we got married. Maybe the problem isn't men, but how you view yourself in relationships," Dr. Heller gently suggested. "You've spent your whole life trying to earn your father's approval, and that pattern may have carried over into your romantic relationships." This thought haunted me all week. I analyzed my marriage, trying to figure out at what point I began to dissolve into it, losing my own desires and goals. The prom wasn't as scary as I'd imagined. Ben was an attentive companion, introducing me to coworkers, but not imposing socializing. When I became engrossed in a conversation with Dr. Jameson, he simply stepped back to the bar, giving me space. "Have you and Ben been together long?" Dr. Jameson asked as we discussed her research on arthritis. "Oh, we're not together," I quickly replied. "We're just friends." Dr. Jameson glanced at Ben, who was standing at the bar, glancing in our direction from time to time. "If you say so," she smiled. "But you know, in our profession, it's rare to find a man who looks at a woman the way he looks at you." Her words took me by surprise. Were my feelings for Ben really mutual? And if so, what was I going to do about it? December was cold and snowy. Maplewood was transformed. The streets were festooned with garlands, and a huge Christmas tree had been erected in the center of town. The spirit of Christmas was in the air, reminding me of family traditions and quiet evenings by the fireplace. My birthday fell on December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas. Usually the day passed unnoticed, in the shadow of the preparations for the main holiday. But this year, Tessa had insisted on celebrating it for real. 33 years is a big deal," she said, planning a party at a local restaurant. The age of Christ, after all. The morning of my birthday began with a text from my mom. A simple, drama-free, "Happy birthday, honey. Love you." I replied with a short, "Thank you," as I had done to all of her messages for the past few months. I was about to leave for work when the doorbell rang. My mom stood on the doorstep, wearing a neat beige coat, carrying a small suitcase and an uncertain smile. "Happy birthday," she said quietly. I froze, not knowing how to react. Marley ran to the door, sniffing warily at the stranger. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I thought. She hesitated. I thought it was time to finally see where my oldest daughter lived. Something in her voice, in the way she nervously rubbed her gloves, made me step back and let her inside. "Are you alone?" I asked, looking down the street behind her. "Yes," she nodded. "Your father thinks I went to Aunt Martha's for 3 days." That admission shocked me. Mom had never lied to my father, never gone against his will, and now she was standing in my hallway, having run away under false pretenses. "Come on in," I said, taking her coat. I was just about to have breakfast. Over a cup of coffee in my small kitchen, we exchanged awkward phrases about the weather, about Marley, about my house. Then my mom suddenly said, "I like your life here, Gina. You seem happier." I looked up from my cup. "Thank you. I really am happier." Mom looked out the window at the snow-covered garden where Marley was chasing tits. "You know, I've always admired you," she said quietly. "Your courage, your ability to go your own way." "Mom." "No, let me finish." She held up her hand. "I could never stand up to your father the way you did. All my life, I've been a shadow, an echo of his wishes and decisions. And worst of all, I let him treat you the way he did." Her eyes filled with tears. "I should have protected you. I should have told him he was wrong. But I was afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of his anger. Afraid of life without him. And because of that fear, I failed you, failed my child. I didn't know what to say. All my life I'd been angry at my mom for her passivity, for not taking my side. But now, seeing her tears, her remorse, I felt my heart soften. "You're here now," I said at last. "That means something." Mom reached across the table and squeezed my palm. "When you left, something changed in me. It was like your leaving woke up a part of me that had been asleep for decades. I started noticing things, the way he talked to me, the way he made decisions without asking my opinion. And I began to wonder, is this really the life I want?" This confession shook me. Mom, always so submissive and quiet, thought about her situation for the first time. "What have you decided?" I asked cautiously. "I don't know," she shrugged. "I'm not as young as you. I'm not as brave. But I know I want to be a part of your life, even if your father is against it." We talked all day. For the first time in years, maybe the first time in our lives, we really listened to each other. My mom talked about her youth, about how she met my dad, about the dreams she put aside for her family. I shared my worries, talked about therapy, my new job, Ben. "He's special to you, right?" Mom asked when I mentioned our Thursday night dinners. "Yes," I admitted. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Making the same mistakes. Of losing myself in a relationship again. Of becoming the kind of woman who measures her worth through a man's approval." Mom shook her head thoughtfully. "You know the difference between you now and that girl who grew up in our house? That girl didn't know her worth. And you seem to be beginning to realize that you are worthy of love just for being you." In the evening, we went to a restaurant where Tessa had organized a small celebration. Mom was a little tense at the new company, but Tessa and her husband David quickly got her talking. Ben arrived with a huge bouquet of wildflowers, my favorite, and a bottle of great wine. Looking at these people, new and old friends, a mom trying to live by her own rules for the first time, I felt a deep gratitude. 6 months ago, I was running from a life that was destroying me. And today, I was celebrating my birthday, surrounded by people who accepted me for who I am. When the party was over, Ben volunteered to walk my mom and me home. At the gate of my house, he said, "Gina, Do you want to go to a movie on Saturday? Just you and me. His eyes were serious, more than just a friendly invitation. It was a real date, and we both knew it. I felt that familiar fear rising inside, but there was something else beside it. Hope, a willingness to take a chance, to give a new relationship a chance. A relationship based not on trying to prove my worth, but on mutual respect and understanding. Yes, I answered, surprised at the firmness in my voice. It would be my pleasure. The sun illuminated the brightly colored flowers in the garden as I sat on the porch with a cup of morning coffee. Marley dozed at my feet, occasionally twitching a paw in her sleep. A quiet Saturday morning, filled with the scent of the blooming lilies Ben had planted this spring. Exactly 1 year had passed since the day I'd left my parents' house in tears. A year that had changed my whole life. There were sounds coming from the house. Ben was making breakfast, whistling a tune softly. We'd been living together for 4 months, and every morning I woke up with a sense of quiet happiness I'd never known before. Our story didn't move quickly after our first real date. We dated for 3 more months, getting to know each other before we decided to live together. Ben never rushed things, letting me move at a pace that was comfortable for me. And that slowness, that respect for my boundaries, became the foundation of our relationship. Breakfast is ready. Ben looked out on the porch, wiping his hands with a kitchen towel. Blueberry pancakes, just the way you like them. Over breakfast, we discussed the weekend plans and the upcoming opening of the new wing of the clinic. 2 months ago, Tessa had suggested I become her partner. Not just a doctor, but a co-owner. You've attracted so many new clients with your specialty in senior animals. It's only fair, she said. I agreed, and now Paws and Tails was expanding. We were adding a new wing, specifically for rehab and care for aging pets. By the way, I met Ray from the construction company yesterday, Ben said, pouring me more coffee. He promises that everything will be ready in 2 weeks. We should be ready in time for the opening. Great, I nodded. Tessa had already ordered a sign for the entrance. Paws and Tails Clinic and Rehabilitation Center. Sounds solid, doesn't it? Ben smiled, looking at me with undisguised pride. You deserve it, Gina. All of this is the result of your hard work and talent. Our plan was ambitious, not just to expand the clinic, but also to open a small shelter for abandoned animals, especially for the elderly, who are rarely taken in from regular shelters. The idea came naturally, combining my specialization and Ben's experience with his hospice. After breakfast, I was going to drive to the clinic. The Saturday on duty fell to me once a month. Ben was going to his farm, where his charges were waiting for him. I'll see you tonight. He kissed me goodbye. I'll cook something special. It's the anniversary of your freedom, after all. I smiled, grateful that he understood the significance of the date. A year ago, I was running away from a life that was destroying me. Today I was building a new life in which I was happy. The shift was going smoothly. A few routine immunizations, a dog with mild poisoning, a cat with an ear infection. Around noon, the phone rang. Alice. We hadn't spoken much this year. Since my mom's visit on my birthday, I'd kept in limited contact with her. Short holiday messages, occasional phone conversations. My father still didn't acknowledge my existence, and that was fine with me. Gina. Alice's voice sounded tense. Dad's in the hospital. He's having a heart attack. I froze, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Not grief, not fear. More of a numbness. How serious is it? Pretty serious. He's in intensive care. The doctors say there's no immediate threat to his life, but... Her voice shook. Gina, I think you should come. My first impulse was to say no. Why go to a man who didn't want to see me, who called me a jerk and never once tried to contact me in the past year? But something inside, either a sense of duty or a need for closure, made me agree. I'll be there tomorrow morning, I said. Let Mom know. That evening, I told Ben all about it. He listened carefully, without interrupting, then asked, Are you sure you want to go? No, I answered honestly. But I had to. Not for his sake, for my own. to close this chapter, to move on without this burden. Ben nodded understandingly. Do you want me to come with you? You don't have to. I shook my head. This is something I have to do on my own. The drive to my hometown seemed shorter than it had a year ago when I was running in the opposite direction. I parked in front of the hospital, a large, modern glass and concrete building, and sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my wits. In the lobby, I met Mom and Alice. Mom looked exhausted, her eyes red with tears, but she rushed to hug me as soon as she saw me. Thank you for coming, she whispered. It meant a lot to him, even if he wouldn't say it. I doubted it, but I remained silent. The ICU was frighteningly sterile and full of equipment. My father lay on the bed, tangled in wires and tubes, pale, gaunt. He seemed smaller than I remembered, no longer the formidable patriarch who could destroy me with a word, but just an aging man facing his mortality. When he saw me, he raised his eyebrows slightly, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. Hello, I said, stopping by the bed. Come to make sure I'm dying? His voice was weak, but the sarcasm was still there. I came to make sure you survive, I answered calmly. He hummed, turning away from the window. How's your clinic? He asked abruptly. I was surprised that he knew about my work. It's good. We're expanding, opening a rehabilitation center for older animals. Dad nodded, still looking out the window. I read about your method of treating arthritis in dogs, he said after a pause, in the Journal of Veterinary Medicine. It's an interesting approach. This admission stunned me. My father, who had always considered veterinary medicine an unworthy profession, not only knew of my publication, but had read it. Thank you, I replied, not knowing what else to say. We talked for about an hour, awkwardly, with long pauses, but without obvious hostility. Dad didn't apologize for his words, didn't admit he was wrong. But there was something new in his questions about my work, about my life. Not approval, no, but recognition. Recognition that I existed apart from him, that my life had value even if it didn't match his perceptions. When the nurse said visiting time was over, I got up to leave. Gina, my father called out to me. Your mother, she's changed since you left. More independent. There was no accusation in his voice, but rather a statement of fact, perhaps with a touch of respect. That's good, I replied. She needs it. Alice caught up with me in the hallway. She looked different than she had a year ago, less glossy, more real. There was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Thank you for coming, she said. I know it hasn't been easy for you. We walked out into the hospital garden, and Alice offered to sit on a bench. I broke up with Michael, she said suddenly. 3 months ago. Why? I asked, surprised. They seemed like the perfect couple to future doctors, both from good families. Alice grinned bitterly. Because I realized I wasn't living my life. Michael was the perfect choice for doctor. Harlow's daughter, but not for me. And how did Dad react? How do you think? She shrugged. He was furious, said I was ruining my life. The first time I was in your shoes was a disappointment. There was no accusation in her voice, more like sad understanding. You know, Alice continued, I never really understood what you were going through all those years ago. I thought you were just dramatizing it, overcomplicating it. And then I found myself on the other side of his love, and it was sobering. I looked at my little sister and saw how much she'd matured over the year. Perhaps my running away was the catalyst for change, not just for me, but for the whole family. I applied for residency in pediatrics, Alice said. Not cardiac surgery like Dad wanted. Pediatrician is what I've always wanted to be. I'm happy for you, I said sincerely. Gina, Alice took my hand. I want us to be sisters. Real sisters. Without all the competition, without the comparisons. Just 2 sisters who support each other. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Maybe something good had come out of this whole thing with my father. Alice had found her voice, her path. I wish she had too, I said, squeezing her hand. We sat in the garden for another hour, talking about everything, about her studies, about my clinic, about Ben, about her new plans. For the first time, we spoke as equals, without a shadow of rivalry or resentment. Before I left, I stopped by to see my mom, who had stayed at the hospital with my dad. She looked tired, but her eyes no longer had the haggard expression I remembered. "How are you?" I asked, hugging her. "I'm doing okay," she smiled weakly. "This year has been difficult, but necessary." We sat in the hospital cafeteria, and my mom talked about the changes in her relationship with my father. How she had begun to speak her mind, how she had returned to painting, a hobby she had abandoned after marriage, how she enrolled in computer courses and now works remotely, typing. "Your father was shocked," she laughed. He couldn't believe that his quiet Lorraine had suddenly found her voice. "Had he changed his attitude toward you?" I asked. "Not right away," she shook her head. "There were a lot of fights at first, but gradually, he started to respect my boundaries. Maybe the heart attack will make him rethink his life even more." As she said goodbye, my mom gave me a big hug. "You don't have to forgive him," she whispered, "but I'm grateful that you came, and for not turning your back on me, even though you had every right to." "I love you, Mom," I said, feeling my throat tighten. I always had. The drive home was filled with reflection. I didn't know if my father would ever change, if he would ever be able to admit his mistakes and ask for forgiveness. But I realized that it no longer defined my life, my self-worth. I had built a new world, with people who love me for who I am, with a job that is fulfilling, with relationships based on respect and support. Driving up to Maplewood, I called Ben. "I'm on my way home," I said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "How'd it go?" I could hear the concern in his voice. "Difficult, but it was right. I'll tell you when I get there. I'm waiting for you," he said simply. Ben and Marley, the two creatures who had become my new family, welcomed me home. That evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset, I told Ben about everything: the conversation with my father, the new Alice, the changes in my mom. "You set boundaries," Ben said when I was done. "It's important. Family isn't just about blood, it's also about respect, acceptance, love. If blood relatives can't give you that, you have the right to start your own family with those who can." I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling deeply grateful for his understanding, for his presence in my life. 3 weeks later, we opened the new wing of the clinic. As I cut the red ribbon, I looked around at the crowd. Tessa and her husband, staff, friends, clients with their pets, and among them, my mom and Alice, who had come especially for the opening. Dad stayed home, still too weak from the hospital, but he sent an official congratulations, which was a big step. That evening, I sat at the table in our bedroom, looking at the results of the pregnancy test. 2 stripes, clear, unmistakable, life budding inside me, a new beginning. I pulled out my notebook and began to write. A letter to my future child. "Dear baby, I don't know yet if you are a boy or a girl. I don't know what color your eyes will be, what your personality will be, but I already know that I will love you, unconditionally, completely, with all my heart. I promise that you will never doubt your worth. You will never feel like you have to earn my love. It's already yours, simply because you are." A year ago, I found the courage to leave a place where I wasn't valued. It was a scary step, but it led me to a real family, to self-respect, to you. I don't know what kind of relationship you'll have with your grandfather. He's a complicated man, with strong beliefs and high standards. But I promise that I will protect you from any pain he might cause. Your grandmother already loves you and can't wait to meet you. Your Aunt Alice will be the funniest aunt in the world. And your father. He's already whispering stories to you every night, with his hand on my still flat belly. He'll teach you everything he knows about animals, about nature, about kindness. We will create for you a home full of love, respect, and support. A home where you will be loved not for your accomplishments, but simply for being you. Love, your mom. I closed the notebook, feeling tears come to my eyes. Not bitter tears, but cleansing tears. Sometimes you have to find the courage to walk away to find your real family and self-respect. Sometimes the hardest step is to step away from the past towards a future that you create yourself.
Любі глядачі, дякую вам за перегляд, ставте лайки та підписуйтесь на канал. Також напишіть в коментарях, чи погоджуєтесь ви з Дженніфер, чи вона мала розказати все матері, чи ні, чи мала все розказати своєму коханцю щодо свого чоловіка, чи ні. І також прокоментуйте, чи вам сподобалось це відео.